Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast presented by onX. The onX Hunt app is your premier GPS hunting app for your phone, for your computer, for your tablet, whatever it is. It is right there available. You can use it on or offline. It's been in 2D and now you can do it in 3-dimensional. It's got weather data, everything else, plot all your waypoints, anything that you need to scout mountain bucks or anything out west and everywhere in between. So if you head over to onxmaps.com and use the coupon code EMW, you can save yourself 20% off of the app. Elk 101. So Corey Jacobson and Elk 101 have put together the most comprehensive elk hunting learning course available, which is called the University of Elk Hunting. You can go through 17 different modules that tell you everything from beginning to end on how to plan, execute, and hopefully come home successful from an elk hunt. Any part of the planning phases, through physical fitness, through gear, learning elk knowledge, elk calling, and packing out the elk and everything in between. So if you head over to elk101.com and use the coupon code eastmeetswest, you can save yourself 20% off a 1-year membership to the online course. So Tethered has been developing the most ultra lightweight mobile hunting gear available, and they're doing that mostly for the saddle hunting community, but now even expanding beyond that. So Tethered they have a couple different missions, and they aren't just trying to sell products as much as they're trying to get more people into understanding saddle hunting and teaching them about it. So if you head over to tetherednation.com, you can see all of their lightweight mobile hunting products, as well as learn more about saddle hunting. So in addition, they have a YouTube channel, which they've been putting up a ton of hunts on, semi-live type hunts on that channel. And actually next week, Jared Schaefer from Tethered is coming out here to Pennsylvania to film me. I'm gonna do a little filming to him. We're gonna saddle hunt together for the end of October, and then the hunt will be up on their YouTube channel shortly after. So excited for that. But head over to tetherednation.com and check that out. And there's one other thing I did want to mention. So if you've been following along with me for long enough, you know that I like to use Mountain Ops products. And so Mountain Ops supplements, they're doing their giant Opstober program this month. So all through October, you can win tons of different prizes that they have. I mean, just anything from small to large, and they have so many different things there and a bunch of deals going on throughout the entire month. So if you head to mountainops.com and if you use the coupon code BEAU free ship, that's BEAUFREESHIP, then you can get free shipping on any order there. And I also have the link over on my website to access it. Helps me out by using any of the links that I have available there over at eastmeetswesthunt.com. Okay, so as far as news updates go this week, I just late last week, I'm talking, I think Friday, I got some more Mountain Bucks Blaze Orange hats in. So I ordered a bunch more in to sell for the season. Well, I only did one post on my Instagram stories and literally sold all of them except for I have a couple left. I actually think I have one left right now. Maybe by the time this comes out, it might even be gone. But sold all of them in 3 days. So I would highly recommend go over check that out, see if there's any left if you're interested in it, and a whole bunch of other apparel items I got up over on the website. So 3% of that goes back to conservation. So I have different quarterly, every quarter I donate to a different conservation group, and for Q4 here, which we're in, that will go to the QDMA. So head over and check that out. That's over on my website, eastmeetswesthunt.com/shop. All right, so up until this point in the season, I have last week I did the Mountain Bucks Q&A podcast and talked a little bit about my season to that point. This past weekend, we had a major cold front come through middle of October. I was really looking forward to hunting that, and so I got to hunt Friday evening and Saturday morning. And I ended up on Friday evening, I didn't see anything. But Saturday morning, I had seen I saw a nice buck, a nice mature buck come behind me. So the trail that I was hoping they were going to cross on, which I had a camera there and had some nice bucks crossing, over the last month through there, heading out to this point that I was thinking they're betting on at some point. And so they didn't come the direction I was hoping to. And so I just started using calls. I felt like that was the right day to start doing a little bit of grunting. So I did a blind grunt and actually heard a grunt back. And so there was this buck, and I heard him coming, like almost coming in like he was on a string. And then he dropped off the bank behind me and crossed the creek and went around. So what I think went wrong was there's a little opening in front of me, and I think he was at the point where he could see out into that opening from the thick stuff and couldn't see anything. So maybe a decoy would have helped there. But anyways, he circled around trying to catch my wind, and I could just see, it was so thick behind me, I could just see him go to the trail that I walked in on. I could hear him about that point, and then I'm guessing he might have caught my scent of my boots there. He didn't run or nothing, but he didn't come in, so he just walked off and went up the valley some further. And I ended up getting a photo of him on my other trail camera that was on the other side, which was the spot I was going to hunt. That there was a couple double scrapes there, and he crossed in front of that. So you win some, you lose some. I ended up seeing 3 more does that actually went on the same path that he did. And I was just, wrong place at that time. But deer were definitely moving. My cameras have been showing it. Definitely just hitting the scrapes pretty hard right now. So I won't get much time to hunt until Jared comes back here next week. Maybe get out Saturday morning a little bit, but just pretty busy right now. But then once I get in the end of October and in November, then I'll be hunting quite a bit more, have some time off of work, and go from there. So this episode of the podcast is with Brett Joy, who's coming out of New Hampshire. And Brett has been hunting whitetails in the Northeastern Appalachian region and all over the United States with a ton of success. And so Brett and I get to talk about some different topics, a few of them just to kind of list them off: getting away from hunting pressure, narrowing down some large tracts of land, hunting timber cuts, trail camera strategy, waiting out rut funnels, hunting the weather, and some more. And what's interesting about this one, so we're talking specifically about New Hampshire in that northern Appalachian region, but I mean, it's really very, very, very similar to here in Pennsylvania, and our tactics are literally, a lot of them are very similar. So you hear a lot of information here, no matter if you're in PA, maybe Virginia, New York, that applies even New Hampshire. And I'll tell you what, just talking to him made me want to go up there and hunt some more of the Appalachian region, in which I've already had on my mind I want to do. So pretty pumped about that. So I hope that you enjoy this episode with Brett, and hope that you're having a good hunting season so far. Don't forget to send in any photos of your success to me. Love to see them. And yeah, we'll go from there. Have a good week, everyone. All right, we're live. And I'm sitting here just getting ready. As with time of recording this, it's leading up into October here, and I'm talking across the screen here to one of my Northeastern brothers from up north, Brett Joy. What's going on, man?
Oh, lots going on. Busy, exciting time of year. Lots going on across the board, but especially in the whitetail woods.
Yeah, man. You've been pretty busy up to this point too, from the watching you on social media.
Yeah, I always try to stay busy. I hate doing nothing, but, this time is especially busy. I like to try to hunt early season as much as I can. And so I always end up usually starting around the 1st of September, somewhere traveling. The seasons in the Northeast don't open until mid-September or so. So I usually make a trip or two early to try to get a head start, mostly because I'm impatient and don't want to wait to hunt until like September 15th, which is a pretty early opener. But if I can get out even earlier, I'll do it. So yeah, I've been to South Dakota and Kentucky, and then been hunting here in New Hampshire the last, week and a half, 2 weeks.
Yeah. No, that's pretty crazy. And when you go on these travel hunts, do you hunt any other species other than whitetails, or you pretty much you want to hunt whitetails wherever you can?
So I haven't really. I had an elk one morning so it's a funny story. I was hunting Montana and I missed the draw, and I had to get big game combo. What do they call it? I'm not sure.
The general tag.
I couldn't get a whitetail tag without also buying an elk tag. And so opening morning, we actually just happened to run into a huge herd of elk when we were looking for whitetail. So I hunted elk for the first morning of the season because I was on a big whitetail and I didn't want to mess them up hunting them in the morning, for that evening. So I hunted elk for one morning, but other than that, I really haven't. I want to. I can't peel myself away from whitetails though. I just haven't been able to. I will at some point. I want to hunt elk and mule deer and all that stuff. And I have a bunch of points out west for elk, mule deer, moose, sheep and stuff, but I'm kind of just waiting. But right now I just can't get off the whitetails. I just love them and I'm not going to apologize for it.
Yeah. I'd have to say by, seeing some of your success, it'd be kind of difficult to want to, break away. And it's funny that I've been trying to do a little bit of the opposite, where I've been doing some, more Western, some different big game hunts, and I absolutely love it. And I'm having trouble breaking away from that, but I want to start, I really want to go to North Dakota potentially next year and beginning of September there and hunt whitetails. And I want to do some more, travel hunts for whitetails. I've been having trouble, again, getting away from the other game. I want it all and I can't do it.
Yeah, that's a problem. And like, that's my thing. I'm like, man, I just love to experience and, learn about whitetails in different habitats and landscapes. That's what I've really learned to kind of enjoy and appreciate over the past, 10 plus years. I would say I've been traveling pretty heavy for them. It's just fascinating to me to see how they adapt and interact with different, landscapes. So, I've hunted west, I've hunted the Midwest a lot. I've hunted obviously the Northeast. I hate to say this and I don't want to alienate anybody, but I'm not particularly interested in the Southeast type whitetail stuff. I don't know why. Mostly because I just don't like the heat. So, yeah. And I don't like a ton of bugs and I don't know. Snakes and nasty critters. It doesn't sound
Spiders.
Like something that's for me, but I'm sure it could be great, but I'm just not super interested in that. But, I've done that. I have hunted in Florida, but for mostly turkeys, but, Northeast, Midwest, the West, and then Canada. And I really enjoy them all. Although I think Canada is slowly creeping to the top of the heap right now. I love hunting north of the border in Alberta. It's just a kind of different deal. Something about it. I love it.
Oh man. Yeah. I went to Alberta one time and it was incredible. It was funny. They warned me going into it, like, you're not going to see many deer, all this stuff. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm from Pennsylvania and thick timber country. We don't see deer very often anyways,
Yeah. I know. And that's what I heard too. And I was like, yeah, okay, this is I can live with this. And actually, I think I probably ended up hunting probably the same property you did up there. And I saw 27 whitetails on that property in one evening. So
yeah,
I haven't seen 27 whitetails in a season in New Hampshire. So it's not there, but I would say probably compared to some other places, the density isn't, the same. It's a little lower, but it's still much higher than at least New England.
Yeah. Did you hunt with Jim Hole up there?
Yeah. I've hunted with Jim a couple times.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's really funny. Yeah. So yeah, we hunted the same areas. Yeah. And I saw, a decent amount, maybe even 15 to 20 in a night. And I was like, yeah, this is actually really good. I don't know what to say.
It's a special area. I really like it up there. I always say that if I can ever swing it, I want to spend like a solid month up there or something like that, but kind of watch the season change, and then we go from velvet to hard horn and turn into those big Canadian chocolate horn monsters that we all dream of.
Yeah. Did you end up getting it done up there in Alberta at all?
Nope, I never have, and that's probably another reason why I want to go back so bad, because the harder things are, the more I want to do them. And no, I've been there. I've been up 3 times. The first year, I had a really nice buck at 40 yards, and I literally was about to draw on him, and the wind kicked, and he caught my wind. Second year, I just had some bad luck. We had some deer on a pattern, and the farmer ended up like tilling up the field that they were coming to, like the day that I felt like I was like it was going to happen. Like I'd seen these bucks several nights in a row, and the night before I had them within 40, but really no shot. And then, of course, the night I'm like, everything's perfect. I figured it out. I know the setup, and I show up to the field, and it's all just dirt. I was like, oh man. So, and then actually last year, I hit a big one in the shoulder. So yeah, I've had some, I've been into them and seen some, actually literally the biggest deer I've ever seen on hoof up there, but just haven't been able to get it done. But more so bad luck or just me not getting it done rather than not having the opportunity or not being in the game. I was in the game every year. So
yeah,
can't complain.
That's I really want to go back in the worst way. I had my first day in the stand, first hour in the evening after, I went through the process with Jim to prove that I was able to climb the tree quietly. I had a buck that he said that he figured went around 200 inches, come within 40 yards of me, but he was on the private land side where I couldn't shoot. And then as he came, the doe that he was chasing drug him downwind behind me. And I'd never seen a deer do what he did. He stopped behind this tree and literally just whipped his head around and locked right in on me. And I almost dropped the bow out of the tree. I was just shaking so bad. It was incredible.
That's the moments though you just you live for. Stuff like that. And half the time it doesn't. Well, probably more than half the time it doesn't work out. But that's part of it.
But anyways, before I get too far into this, Brett, I'd like you to give a background on yourself. And you talked a little bit about your love for travel and the hunt here, but tell me a little bit about yourself and, where you live at and some of the bucks that you're hunting, locally.
Yep. So I live in New Hampshire. So in the Northeast in New England, is where I grew up. I kind of, taught myself to hunt, I guess. I had a couple guys. So my family, I don't come from hunting family. I come from, I'd say my mother's father and my mother's parents and my father's parents are both from the city right outside of Boston. So they have, not outdoorsy whatsoever. My parents moved out of Massachusetts up to New Hampshire to the country. So they had an appreciation obviously for the outdoors, or else they wouldn't have left the city. My dad has been big into fly fishing for a long time. So through that and through camping and actually sled dog racing, we used to have a kennel of Siberian Huskies and race sled dogs. I was introduced to the outdoors, and that's what I love, no doubt. Like I get like anxiety when I go in the city and just can't wait to get out. It's like I'm just like counting the seconds so I can leave the second I enter. So I definitely love being outside, love the outdoors. And I don't know, something about potentially, I guess, bow hunting, captivated me when I was really young, and I decided I wanted to do it. My dad probably was like, where's this coming from? Like, I'd wake up on, I think it was like Sunday mornings, ESPN used to have hunting on. I used to watch that. I'd be up at, 6 a.m., just like sitting, waiting for the hunting shows to come on, and then started hunting kind of on my own and shooting like squirrels and whatever the heck got in the backyard with like a toy bow and a BB gun. And then, ended up, getting a real bow and just started to hunt deer and turkeys, and really taught myself how to do it. My dad used to, so you're supposed to, this was a while ago, but supposed to hunt with a licensed hunter when you're under 16, and my dad would like let me climb the tree stand and like go 100 yards away and like take a nap against a log. And we were probably, I don't know what time it was. It was probably like 2 p.m. So we went from like 2 p.m. to like 3:30 p.m. and like leave 2 hours before dark. But I had no idea what we were doing, and I was having fun and I was out there. So I was happy. And so really because of that, it took me a long time to experience any sort of success whatsoever. And then even my dad's actual business partner, he was a hunter, or still is a hunter to an extent, but not really a serious one and not very successful. Not because, lack of ability. He didn't really care. Just kind of wanted to be out there. So I hunted with him, wasn't very successful. So there was probably a period of like, I don't know, I think I shot my first deer and turkey when I was 16, but I've been hunting for years before that, before I even saw an animal really. Because it's, it's tough up here to see anything. If you see a deer, you're pretty excited, even if it's like a fawn. And there's a lot of people that go, all year maybe without seeing a deer in the type of environment we're in. So I'm in the southern part of New Hampshire, but where I live is like kind of getting a little bit out of the southern populated area and a little bit northwest towards some of the big woods in the mountains. So I'm kind of on like the edge. And as I get older, I move more and more into north and west into these mountains to try to get away from hunting pressure and people. And I just love the wilderness and the big woods and the high elevations. It's just kind of what my thing is now. I love it. I do hunt some still, I own some property. And that's still mountains too, I guess. It's just not as big. The road I live on is called Mountain Road. So that should paint a picture for you. But I even consider that like, small woods now. And I'm hunting like, 1 to 3,000 acre continuous blocks of timber there. And I'm like, oh, that's a small woods, which it really isn't. But, I really like the big, 5, 10, 20,000 acre pieces where you can kind of just go and get lost. But so that's kind of my background and what I do. I love to travel, obviously. I like to appreciate, everywhere that whitetails live and experience all those types of environments, habitats. And also I like to film. So that's the other aspect. Me and my buddies have been filming our hunts for a long time now. We've been involved with, various different projects. So that's always fun and adds another, aspect to it.
Yeah. What's the recent project you've been doing? Is it called Seabucks?
That was it's actually not the most recent now, but it was, we filmed that last season.
Okay.
And that was, that basically followed the story of hunting in New England. And we had, 3 different storylines. We had a storyline in suburban Mass kind of showing, what it's like to hunt in that environment, right outside of Boston on the coast. Then we had myself and Ross Roberge. He's my hunting and filming partner, and followed us in the mountains of New Hampshire. And then we had a group of guys on the Maine coast, and they hunted some islands off the coast of Maine and some mainland stuff, big woods. So really kind of a diverse mix of, hunting scenarios that you encounter in New England, because it is pretty diverse. It's a small region of the country, but there's a lot going on as far as whitetails and how you can hunt them. So that was, we did that one for Realtree. We're pretty proud of it. We think we did a pretty good job of, telling the story of the New England hunter, showing the culture and the tradition and some of the animals that, we have to hunt here. So that was good. This year, we're not doing that exactly. Well, we're not doing Seabucks again, but we're going to be producing content semi-live. Most of us come from a semi-live background anyway for producing content. The main producer, John Lewis, who kind of owns the company that we're doing this under, Cold Front Creative, he was worked for Bill Winke at Midwest Whitetail and cut his teeth learning to edit and produce semi-live shows. He's done stuff for Cabela's and, like I said, Bill Winke, and Midwest Whitetail and Realtree and a bunch of other companies. So that's what we're doing now. And that's on our YouTube channel, which is Just Hunt Club. So actually my South Dakota hunt is out there. And so is a Kentucky hunt that I had. And then we got a New Hampshire hunt coming, I think the end of the week or Monday. So lots of fresh, up-to-date content coming out there. So that's the latest thing that we're doing.
Nice. I'll have to check those out. I did watch some of the Sea Bucks episodes there, and I think it was a really cool series there. So I'd highly recommend anybody checking that out, along with Brett's YouTube channel there. I'm definitely going to be tuning in to check out some of that stuff. It's funny, as someone that like you with creating content and stuff, I don't consume as much, so like when I do find some good ones there, I like to be able to check them out when I can.
Yeah, well, it's tough for me too, because I just don't have a lot of time. So there's so many things I want to see and watch, and it's like, man, I just don't have time, and it gets away from you. So you're kind of focused on what you're doing and trying to get your stuff done, and it's tough to watch everybody else's, unfortunately, even though you'd like to. So I can relate to that. Yeah,
I hear you. And so to step back a little bit, and I have to say, unfortunately, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, that I've never been in, I guess, the true New England before. And that's been on, I have it written down, even for non-hunting reasons, just to take a trip up there. My brother and his wife had went up and driven all the way up to Maine and did a bunch of camping and hiking along the way, and just said it was unbelievable. That I don't know, it just seems like an area that for me it was just always overlooked, and I'm not that far away. I live in northern Pennsylvania, right on the New York border, and I've never been further north than New York as far as on this
yeah
side.
Well, you should come, but there's probably a reason why a lot of people don't get up here, is because it's not on the way to anywhere. We're like tucked up in this northeast corner. Unless you're going to like New Brunswick or Nova Scotia, unless you're going to a destination in New England for a purpose, you're not going to be traveling through. Because like I said, it's not on the way to anywhere. It's like that dead end road, right? Like it's like you get past New York City and it's like dead end, like where this doesn't go anywhere. So unless you're headed up there, you wouldn't have come through. So I hear that from a lot of people. It's kind of surprising to me, but then when I think about it, I'm like, that really makes sense unless you're coming up here. But yeah, it's a really unique area. For sure. Like I said, it is diverse, and we have a lot of different landscapes as far as like farmland and suburban stuff, and then of course mountain stuff, and then lowland swamp, and then coastal stuff, and big woods, and it's kind of like we got it all, except for maybe like wide open plains or something like that. But it's a really, really pretty region of the country as well. I think growing up here, I didn't really appreciate it the way that I should, but now I don't know. I seem to appreciate every time I'm in the woods. I just like stop and I'm up on a mountain, look around. I'm like, man, this is awesome. This is crazy that this is right up my back door. So especially this time of year with the foliage, it's just unbelievable. So it's a really nice area. It's got some, it's unique, I'd say. It's the landscape, the forest type, very rugged, poor soils. It's just a tough place to be in the outdoors, I would say. Rocky, like there's just not a lot of, like, I always tell a story with the first time I ever went to Ohio. I found a big rub line, and it was like in November, and I was so pumped to go back the next year. And I went back with a group of guys, and I wanted to show them this rub line. And I went back there, and they were like completely like healed up and grown, because the soil's so good and the climate's so good, and everything just grows extremely fast there. And you could hardly even see the rubs the next year in like the summer. And I was like scratching my head. If a deer rubs a tree in New England on a mountain, it's going to look like a fresh rub for like 5 years. It's just the regrowth and the regeneration is so slow, because the short growing season, and then it's even when there is a growing season, it's relatively cool, and then the soils are so poor. So it's just a different environment and landscape, but it's really unique, and I enjoy it. It's super, super hard, unforgiving, but I think that's what makes it such a challenge and why I love it so much.
Yeah. And you said about the poor soils, and that definitely probably has an effect too, with the deer really being able to reach their maximum potential and everything. I mean, I know when I talked to a biologist here before, we was talking about in Pennsylvania across the state, and where you're seeing the bigger bucks come from, and some different things there, because I started hunting some remote area, like really remote areas in north central Pennsylvania. And I was finding, some big rubs and stuff. I'm like, there's gotta be just giants here. And I was getting photos over these old ass deer that were not very big whatsoever. And he's like, well, there wasn't good undergrowth, the soil wasn't great, if there was no mass crops, they didn't have a whole lot of stuff, browse and everything. Is that kind of similar to what you're dealing with?
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like there's pockets of so I focus on areas that are, I try to find areas that have a bit better habitat and better genetics. But no, that's definitely accurate. Most of our mature bucks are, 120-inch 5-year-olds, that type of stuff.
Yep.
And there's some, 90-inch 7-year-olds as well that are running around. But we do get, we do get some flashes of some pretty good genetics and some big deer. And I think that all of our deer, people talk about antler score, and I'm actually a scorer for the New Hampshire club, so I'm aware of score and talk about it. But I don't think it's a really good way to judge a deer in the Northeast. If you kill a 135-inch, 6-year-old buck up here that's 200 pounds and it's got a huge head on him, and he's been running the mountains for 6 years, and he's just a stud like that. I don't think 100. If you talk to guys in the Midwest or in Canada or wherever, and a 135 is like nothing, and it's like, yeah, I can see that, but up here that's kind of a different animal, and he may have big mass or something like that. He just might be short tines, but yeah, I like to think that any of our bucks, when they get old enough, will be a trophy, I guess, if you will, or a deer that almost anyone would want to shoot. So I kind of look at it like that. I think that also our deer really don't start to realize their true antler potential till they're 6, 7, 8 years old, because I think the habitat is so poor that they're putting so much into, survival that it takes them that much longer. I think, I've hunted all over the place, like I've said, in the Midwest, and it seems like deer are pretty much where they're going to be at 4 or 5 in the Midwest. But I think really, I've seen deer grow up until 10 years old around here. Deer that were, 130, 140 maybe at 5, and they're 160, 170 at 8, 9, 10. So they'll continue to grow, which is an interesting thing. And I've been seeing that more and more. The more I track deer, over the years and really start to pay attention to that stuff, it seems like they're really starting to hit their stride around 6 or 7 years old. Actually, the buck I killed last year was an 8-year-old, and he grew his biggest rack at 8.5. So, yeah, that's an interesting thing. I think that's one thing that's very different than a lot of the rest of the country. I think our deer are just, and I'm not saying they don't continue to grow in the Midwest. I know that they do. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying in the Midwest, they might be 150 inches by 5, and then they maybe grow 20 inches in the next 3 to 4 years. I'm saying our deer are 125 inches at 4 or 5, and then they get to 150, 160 by 7, 8, 9 potentially. So yeah, there's just they continue to make jumps. It's a slow process, but that's kind of seems like that's how it goes. So to get a truly giant deer around here, it seems like they're always like 7+. Like every one of these ones that comes out that, your jaw drops and you see the picture of them, it's like, yeah, that deer was, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old.
That's so incredible that, when they get that old, like it's just, there's a deer that I'm hunting still this year. I don't know if he's 9 or if he's 10, but I started running cameras in this area in 2015, and he was either a 3 or a 4-year-old then, and he just keeps. He grew. He got I think his biggest was 2018, and then he seemed to shrink up a little bit in 2019. His body just looked terrible, and this year he's looking a little healthier again, and a little bit bigger. So it's tough to see, but it's just amazing how they can get that old. And where you're hunting at, I know you were saying you want to get away from people, a lot. Do you have much hunting pressure, or what's that kind of look like?
It really depends on where you're at. You can go to certain areas around here and have a ton of hunting pressure and be running into people all day. And then you can go to other areas and not see anybody all year. there's the type of hunter that likes to hunt pressure deer and figure them out, and kind of like play off other hunters and figure out, how deer are reacting to pressure. I don't particularly care for that, just because when I'm in the woods, I like to be by myself other than like a camera guy. That's just kind of how I enjoy being outside. So I don't want to be around a bunch of other people. So I kind of tend to take the other approach, and I'm going to go deeper and higher and further and try to find deer that aren't pressured. So it's, I don't want to say that this may come across wrong, but the challenge for me is finding these areas where there's no pressure and these deer are, moving naturally and, being deer and behaving like you want them to.
Yeah.
That's the big challenge. I would say that once you do find that, they are moving more naturally in daylight. So you have a better chance at them. Now, that being said, if you're hunting 10,000 acres of timber, that's still a tough proposition to find that deer moving in daylight. Just because he's moving doesn't mean he's within 2 miles of you. Unfortunately, that's just kind of how it goes. But so it's I don't know. It can be. I mean, some of the guys that are hunting in the suburban spots around here killing 2 big bucks a year with their bow, and I think that's awesome. But that's just not really what I enjoy doing, and playing that game and worrying about how close you are to houses and if you have permission and are you supposed to be here and is this other guy staying too close. I just don't like that stuff. It just ruins it for me, I guess. So I just tend to get away. And so, yeah, most of the areas that I hunt have little to no pressure. Some of them do. I would say every place I hunt has somebody else hunting in the area, but I try to get in spots where there's nobody. And so, yeah, those areas are relatively unpressured, I'd say, at least the ones that I hunt.
Yeah. And so with those areas, when you say, you're going in, further and stuff, are you meaning like, say further on, say the dirt roads back in the mountains away from any towns, or are you saying more boots, going in further on the ground, or what is that? Or does that kind of depend too?
It's both, actually. So, how I find, and I always approach this when I'm looking at public land, it doesn't matter if I'm in New Hampshire or, Montana or whatever, but this isn't anything you haven't heard before, but I try to get away from population centers. So major towns or cities, because those are the areas that are going to have the highest density of people, which means the highest density of hunters. And, the surrounding areas around it are going to be, especially public land, is going to be, saturated with hunters. So I try to get away from those population centers. And then once I get there, I try to find just big continuous tracts of whitetail habitat. The more rugged, the better, because, this is the gauge. Well, when you drive all the way up here and then you take this dirt road and then you hike up this trail and then you hike over the top of a mountain and then through a swamp, and then 2 hours in, you're like, what the hell am I doing? What? And then I go, nope, that's what I'm looking for, that moment, because that you lost like 99% of people at that moment.
Yeah. So
that's when I know, okay, this is an area that if I am feeling that way, most other people aren't coming in that area at all. So that's when I know I'm probably going to be alone, but I'm not always. I mean, sometimes people get back in there and that's great. And I have a lot of respect when people put the same effort that I do and get back in to some of these areas. But yeah, that's what I'm looking. I'm just looking for stuff that's hard to access. I mean, if it means taking a canoe or a kayak 2 miles across a lake and then, hiking another 1.5 miles up a mountain and climbing a couple thousand feet or whatever, that may be what it takes to get away from these people. But that's to me, that's kind of part of the challenge, like I said, and the enjoyment of doing that rather than, hunting where there's a bunch of other people. So I like to be alone. I like the wilderness. I always have. So if I can be in a stand or doing whatever, tracking a buck, and know that there's nobody within at least a mile of me, I'm pretty happy. So that's kind of the goal.
It's funny that, so before we started recording, you and I were talking a little bit about trying to, juggle day jobs and hunting, and, especially when you're getting lower on light as the season goes. And that's what I hate about, I have a trouble with hunting after work. I can't get in the right mindset. Like I'm in work mode or hunt mode. It's tough to get into it. And then I can't get to my normal spots because I don't have the time, and I just don't. feel right. So like when I'm looking at spots, similar to what you're saying, even smaller towns, if I know that, I assume that there's local hunters there that, I'm trying to find the spots if I'm off, like say for a week during the rut, that aren't within, or whatever time I'm off, but not within driving distance for someone to go after work, or someone's got to make a trip out of it to do this, and that's something I kind of seem to look at. And then, and it all depends, like you said, it just depends on where you're at as far as how far you need to go in or whatever. And that kind of suck fest when you're doing that, walking in and stuff. I was even thinking that scouting this past weekend, I was at this spot, and right now it's still warm here, and we do have rattlesnakes here. And I was like went across this one mountain and down over, and I was trying to traverse through this thick creek bottom to come up the other side, and I'm just, bitching up a storm to myself, and I'm like, well, I can promise you there's probably not going to be anybody else in here in archery season. So that's one benefit of it.
That is one of the big challenges, though, is finding time to get into these areas, because it's not just like we discussed before. It's not just a simple, hey, I'm done with work, I'm going to run out and jump in the stand. It's like, no, like a lot of these areas, it's almost an all day commitment to get in. Like if you're going to go in there, you're you might as well stay all day, or you're at least going to be most of the day. So. And even to scout or run cameras, that's why I try to run a lot of cell cameras, because to try to get into these spots to check cameras or, run cameras, it's just crazy. So I've went almost entirely to cell cameras in these deep spots if I can have service, which is always a challenge out here. But yeah, I mean, it's not only the time you need to spend in the woods, it's the time spent getting there is also part of it. So you have to try to figure that out. And we have a couple other buddies around here that kind of do the same thing as me. And we always say the same thing. It's like, I found the spot, but I don't know how the hell I'm going to get to it or hunt it. It's like, I don't know. It's almost like too far. And it seems like that 2 mile range to me, unless you're going to track a buck, but to, really run cameras or set up stands or do that, any of that type of stuff and spend any significant time. It seems like if you're much more than 2 miles in, it becomes almost unattainable to really do what you need to do. So, I totally agree. The longer you can push it though, towards that and still figure out a way, is good. And then, just try to use everything you can, just be efficient with, your travel routes and how you get in, and try to find the quickest way and the easiest way and the best way to ascend and descend. And all that stuff, that always helps too. I'm always trying to figure out the best way to get into these spots quickly and quietly and not make big impacts. Because every time that's another thing I think that is kind of overlooked at some of these areas is those deer literally, I mean, they don't see people ever. So when you go in, I don't know, it's almost like in my mind, you just set a bomb off in their bedroom, because they're just not used to any human intrusion for the most part, like zero. So you really can't get away with a ton. So, you're trying to get in and you want to scout and you want to be in there as much as you can, but at the same time, you want to make it appear to them like you're never in there. So it's a challenge. There's lots to consider.
Yeah. And so when you're going into these spots or kind of choosing them, what's kind of your thought process, say if you're looking at maps ahead of time and then the boots on the ground, what's that kind of look like from the home to going into what would be your ideal location?
Well, obviously we already talked about what I'm looking for as far as area and just a spot that is extremely hard to access. But once I get in there or identify an area like that, I'm looking for, I'd say, really two big things, and one is topography and the other is just different habitat types, or really what it comes to around here is forest types. So we have a lot of mixed hardwoods, we have a lot of softwoods or conifer as well, so those always make good transition lines between the two. And then we have a lot of cuts, a lot of logging operations, and so I focus on those as well. So if I can find an area that, is really hard to access, that's up high, and it's got some good, different habitat types converging, and then some topography. That's the other thing. Like some of these areas have like I was actually in a spot, I think Sunday, that is just unbelievable habitat. It's like 500 acres of like different stages of clear cuts, and the bedding and the food is unbelievable in there. But like it's just there's nothing there that really like defines deer movement, and it's a tough place to hunt. So I'm looking for areas that have like a focal point, and that may be a bench or a saddle or a long spine or something like that. So if I can find that type of topography I'm looking for, that's going to allow me to hunt there effectively and then have the habitat to support it and be deep, I can be pretty well, assured that there's going to be, some mature deer in there, that they're going to be, at least killable to some degree if I put my time in.
Yeah. So as you're saying that, when you were saying that the spot that you had found, on Sunday there that wasn't fitting, was it more didn't have much topography, or what did that kind of look like?
No, it actually has a ton of topography. It's a mountainside.
Okay.
But it just didn't. We have a lot. So like I don't know exactly where you are, Beau, but I'm pretty familiar with Pennsylvania and then like upstate New York and Ohio and West Virginia. It seems to me like a lot of that topography is pretty predictable and I'd say organized. You have these long main ridges and then these finger ridges off of them, and it's all, kind of pretty, like you'd draw it up if it was perfect. We don't have that. We have a lot of I just say it's totally random topography. It's like, a huge mountain, and then a big swamp next to it, and then a series of ridges, and then another. It's just when you look at the topography, it's like, what the heck happened here? Like, it just looks like a jumbled mess. So there's no consistency within it. So it's actually a lot harder to find the topography I'm looking for around here compared to say, I think Pennsylvania or upstate New York or like West Virginia or Ohio. That stuff is a lot more uniform, I think, in the way that it lays out. Up here is a lot different. And so this particular area was literally a mountainside, and it just was just a giant side hill and like 500 acres of it, and, different stages of clear cut, but nothing. All these stages of cuts were fairly close to each other, I imagine within 5 years. So there wasn't any really hard edges or transition lines that were going to funnel or the deer were going to hang out along. The only edge and the only place I really have a camera there now is an edge between mature timber and that 500 acre clear cut. So, and I was actually thinking about this when I was in there. I was like, I can't even hunt this 500 acres. I'm not going to even be in it. I'm going to be on the edge of it because it's just pointless to be in there trying to figure out deer movement, because it's all great habitat, great cover, great food, great bedding. So what's going to, funnel activity? And it's crazy because I'll run cameras in there even, and I don't get a whole lot of pictures, but I walk up the logging roads and it's just polluted with deer tracks. And, it's like, there's a ton of deer in here. It's so random within those areas, and there's nothing that really concentrates them the way I like to see it. So on those areas, I don't even hunt the middle of the clear cuts. I hunt the edges, where those transition lines between mature timber and those clear cuts are. So I should say, yeah, I mean, you could probably hunt it, but it's just a challenging area. It's just kind of a gradual climb on the mountain, and no, really defined or aggressive topography to funnel deer movement.
Yeah, no changes in it there. I think I'm following you. So when it comes to say, I'm gonna dive in a little bit of logging cuts. So I love logging cuts, and actually when I did a survey a few weeks back on Instagram, people asking questions, and a lot of had to do with logging cuts, and I've heard a bunch of different input on how guys hunt them, and I don't really think there's really one right or wrong way to do that, but I'm interested in how, what are the logging cuts like? Is there a certain age that you're focusing on? Are you looking at the more of the exterior edges like you were mentioning, but also any interior stuff? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. So they vary around here for sure. You get all sorts of cuts from, selective cut areas to, breather cuts or shelter cuts, patch cuts, and then some big clear cuts. It seems to me like you need a significant amount of acreage in this area to be significant enough. Well, I just said significant twice, but a big enough amount of acreage to be significant enough to like change the deer activity and concentrate the deer. So if you have like a 5-acre cut, that's probably not going to be enough to make much of a difference. So a lot of these areas I'm looking at are, 100 or 200 or 300 acres that, they maybe have some selective cuts and then some clear cuts, but there's a lot of early succession growth going on. And I think that's the main thing. Like I had mentioned before, our regen is very slow compared to the rest of the country, at least in my estimation. So we don't see much regen at all the first year. It takes probably a year 3, 4, 5 before we get any significant cover out of them. Really, it's past 5 where you get to a point where the deer are bedding, and it's more like 5 to 10 years. That's when you get kind of cover that's above your head. Those early cuts, though, maybe year 2 or 3, those are really ideal food sources. So we might sit over those and near bow season on the edge of them and trying to get deer moving through them or relating to them as a food source. But during rifle season or muzzleloader season, we sometimes will sit these cuts because the deer will cut across them or, be moving through them. So that's kind of how we hunt them. I think probably the biggest way that I use them to actually hunt, like we're talking stand location, is I use them to funnel deer activity, because a lot of times they're not going to go through the middle of those cuts because, years 1 through 5, they're too open. And then, years 5 through 10, they're too thick. And I don't think the deer are using the interior of those cuts much at all, unless there's logging roads or skid trails going into them. I think if it's, a huge area that's all grown up extremely thick, they're actually just going to stick to the edges. And I don't believe really that our deer and this isn't, the whole country I'm sure is not like this where there's cuts in the mountains, but I don't think our deer like to bed in those cuts very much at all. I think they like to bed in the darker, more mature timber where they can see a long ways, on the downhill side and get the wind in their favor. That seems to me like they'll bed kind of above those cuts, and some of the stuff that, was just not marketable or great timber, it was too rough country to log. That's kind of where I see them bedding. So there's a lot to digest and unpack when you're talking about these cuts. There's just so many factors as far as, where they are in the south or north face, what the regen's like. Is it woody browse, or do you have some forbs and some really, highly palatable and nutritious stuff coming up? What stage it's in, where they're located in relation to topography. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty diverse, but like, I would say that most of my areas have them. So I'm focusing a lot on those. And if it's not for food sources or, some cover, I think a lot of times they may sit on the edge if it's really thick, and use that to, at their back as well. But, yeah, if nothing else, to funnel deer movement around them, almost like a field would do in the Midwest.
Yep.
That's kind of like, I always try to make things easier than they are, because they can get really complicated when you're looking at big woods and mountains and thousands of acres. And, I was lucky to hunt the Midwest when I was in my early 20s, and I just kind of related everything back to it. So you can almost look at it like a cornfield, like a big cut, right? So, they're going to feed in it, but a lot of times they're not going to be right in the middle of the cornfield. They're going to be around the edges, or like any ag field. When they're moving during the daylight, they're going to avoid running through the middle of it. So it's going to kind of pinch deer activity or whatnot. So that's kind of how I look at them, but I love them. It's just, they're great for many different things, many different reasons.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And it's funny what you said about, when they start getting that cover that's, over head height there, when you're saying that 5 to 10 year range, I could tell the little bit difference in the soil, as you mentioned earlier, for us. And this is just my interpretation. I'd say the 3 to 8 year range is what I would consider ideal for that in where I'm at in Pennsylvania. So it's interesting to see the comparison there.
Yeah, it's super slow. I actually have, like I said, a little piece of land here, and I actually just had it cut. They just wrapped it up. But my original piece I had was cut in 2014. So it's been 6 years, and just last year and this year, it's finally got to the point where it's like ideal habitat as far as, cover and browse. But it took that long to get there. And it's kind of a slow process. And you're like wanting it to happen fast. And you go back a year or two and stuff is shin high still. And you're like, ugh, what the heck? But those are the years when you get that new growth that they're most attractive as a food source, especially like in the summer.
Yeah, I can understand that. So as you're talking about the timber cuts and different vegetation features and the different, types of timber and how that relates to terrain there. So what does that look like? You mentioned earlier about using a lot of, trail cameras to help you in your scouting. So how are you running these trail cameras to be able to figure out what you're going to do next as far as when hunting comes around?
So I guess, could you get a little more specific?
Yeah, that was a loaded
finding deer, because I really do. I could talk for days on every aspect of it. So to find the deer or pattern deer or like summer, fall, like what do you want to hear about?
Let's focus on the timeline. So this podcast is going to release most likely in about the third week of October. So let's say you're going to be hunting, leading up into the pre-rut type stage. What are you doing for trail camera strategy then to say you already have, there's a couple big bucks in the area, a couple mature bucks worth hunting. What are you doing to try to figure that out and figure out what you're going to do from there? And again, I know that's a loaded question. That's a very broad, but just to give a starting point there.
Yeah. So most of October, and especially late October, is obviously mostly everybody listening to this probably knows is when whitetails are scraping the most and scrapes are most active. And that's especially true in the big woods and in the mountains where I'm at. So, I would say that 95% of my cameras are going to be on scrapes that time of year. I would say that, we run most of our cameras on scrapes almost year round. I don't run actually cameras year round. I run them from July 4th, I always say is the kickoff, because I just can't do it year round. It's just so much time and I need a break. But I run them from early July through January, I'll say, and they're mostly always on scrapes. The only other thing I do run them on is like pinch points. And that may be like the back edge of a cut where it meets, just transition lines, if you will, but on like maybe a main trail or a really like heavily used trail that's like a rut funnel or something like that. But it seems to me in the big woods, those trails like that, those heavily used rut funnel trails, that when deer are in what I call like zombie mode, when they're literally like running all day long, like they're not even real animals, they're just like machines. Those are the trails that I see those mature bucks using then, those big trails, but I don't see them using them much else or much, any other time of the year other than, like probably from November 7th through early December. So those are we will run them, put these cameras on those type of trails in these big funnels or travel corridors. But really that time of year, late October, I'm really relying on intel from scrapes. And so, those can be located anywhere really, but I like scrapes that are, on saddles in the mountains or on, transition lines between two types of habitat. Maybe it's a swamp and, a softwood stand of timber or hardwoods and a cut or something like that. So they're going to be located over scrapes for sure. If I can find a primary scrape in one of these locations where the topography is favorable, like that's where I'm probably going to be hunting. And I'm going to run a camera over it to know when, what buck's using it. And, hey, if this buck's frequenting the scrape, I need to be in there on the next cold front in late October with whatever wind. But that's kind of what I'm doing there. So scrapings, I think, is huge in the big woods, especially because some of these deer may not be in the area every day. So when they come through, they're going to check these scrapes because they haven't been there. They might have been on the next mount or, the next mountain over for the last week. So when they come back, they're going to check these scrapes and see what's been going on while they were gone. So they're really a big deal. And if you can find a big primary scrape in like a saddle or something like that, or along a transition where there's a lot of activity, you can really find, that can be a really good place to hunt. And not just late October. I've actually was on like 3 or 4 good deer last weekend or the weekend before, I guess, opening weekend of the season, which I think was around September 19th. So I guess a month before this comes out, but those bucks were hitting that scrape in, late September in this saddle because, it was ideal habitat and they're up there anyway. So yeah, that's what I'm definitely going to focus on. It seems like that scraping activity starts to trail off here after the first week in November. And then we're pretty much hunting those travel, those rut funnels or, those main highways, if you will. So that's kind of where we transition. And then I actually really don't take much into consideration from trail camera data after about November 7th. Obviously, if I get a picture that tells me a buck's around or a big buck's, whatever, I'll take that into account. But if I'm not getting the pictures that I hope to get, I don't really worry too much about it because it seems like those bucks will literally just walk right by those scrapes and not even pay any attention to them in mid-November. So I think it's probably the most challenging time to get pictures of big ones sometimes is that mid-November, because they're just on the move and they just don't stop and they're not, nosing around and being social with other deer. They're literally, like I said, on zombie mode, just absolutely machines covering large swaths of timber and mountains looking for a hot doe. So that's actually in late October, I'd say is probably the time where I get the most out of running trail cameras. And the focal point of like trail camera season, if you will, is that late October timeframe. So I'm almost 100% relying on trail camera data late October through early November. And then, like I said, once after that first week of November comes, then I'm kind of just throwing that to the wind and I'm hunting those travel corridors in an area where I know there's, a deer that I want to kill.
Yeah, that's I see similar results from mine. Like I don't even check my cameras as much, through November's. And again, we talked about before we were recording, but I'm in a tree most of the time then. Like, and from seems like for me, mid-October through the end through Halloween is like the best trail camera data I'm gonna get as far as seeing what big deer are moving through the areas. And then from there,
absolutely,
using the intel on, say scouting you did in the past or whatever to know kind of where some of those funnel areas are. And I'm trying to put myself in the highest opportunity area because, similar to you, there's not a real high deer population. So, you might have a few days of not seeing much before, but that doesn't mean a spot isn't good.
No, that's like we talked before the podcast. It's the mental game of believing in your spot and that you're in the right spot and kind of sticking with it. It's always a challenge in these areas with low deer densities because you're just not, you're not getting that validation that, hey, I picked the right spot because I saw, 4 bucks cruise by today. I didn't see a big one, but I saw the, 4 bucks doing what I, expected them to do. It's like you may see, last year actually in sea bucks, I hunted for, when we filmed sea bucks, I hunted for, I think 7 straight days in the same stand, more or less. I had 2 stands hung on the same trail or 2 trails that were about 100 yards apart. So I was hunting them depending on the wind direction, but I hunted that spot for 7 straight days. And I think I saw 3 bucks in 7 days, and that's dark to dark, 11-hour sits. So that's kind of gives you an idea. And to be honest with you, seeing 3 bucks in that time frame is not bad for around here. It really isn't. So, but it just shows you, you're going literally like, I think I hit 3 straight dark to dark days without seeing a deer. And it really you start to question yourself big time and doubt your plan and your decision to sit there in your spot. So, I think it's important that you believe in your spot, and have some sort of data or reason or logic, that you can believe in, other than just like kind of a hunch. Because when you have a hunch, you don't really know. Seem to be the spots that you just can't stick it out in because you're not sure. Most of the spots that I'm committing, that large amount of time to, I have, previous years experience or trail camera pictures to prove that this is a really good time to be in the stand. And, there's 2 or 3 bucks that I'd killed it. I know that the last 2 years they came through here during this time period. And so, that's kind of what I'm sitting on. And I think a lot of the, I'm not really sitting on any, I would say, current trail camera data during that mid to late November time frame. The only way I'm using cameras in that time frame is basically using the data I got from them before to know a buck that I'm interested in is in that area. And then I'm relying on previous year's data and then also that off-season scouting to put me in the right spot to kill them.
Yeah, I agree with that. Then it's funny, and I have a few spots I can think of as you're talking about this that like I just know are good. Like there's one spot I'm thinking of that I killed a couple bucks out of the same tree, and from November 6th through the 15th, you're not going to see many deer, but it's a great spot. And it doesn't really give you the sign that jumps out at you. There's not even any scrapes there. There's not any rubs. It's just the way that everything funnels down through that, they're traveling through there, and you just kind of got to be you just got to be there essentially. And you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And a lot of those spots that are like that, they're tougher to identify and take longer to prove out, because they don't jump out at you. Like you said, I have, a couple spots like that as well that you just kind of learn over the years that, hey, this is for whatever reason, there's definitely a reason. It's not random, but it may just be a little more subtle and harder to determine why they're doing what they're doing. But yeah, those are great spots, and spots that, you really ought to spend your time. But, the scrape thing is great in late October and early November, but it seems like that just turns off. It's not like they just, neglect them 100%. They don't. They still hit them if they're running by them. You might get like a random one on November, 16th at 2 p.m. and, a big buck after hits the scrape. But it's more like he just runs by it. It's there. He noses it, hits the branch, and just keeps on trucking. It's not like he's going to that scrape. It's like I was going by that scrape and I stopped for 4 seconds and checked it out, and then I'm off because I gotta go find a doe.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I agree. And so another question that this kind of brings up with, as you were talking about these rut funnel areas, do you have like any sort of, are you focusing towards, the tops of the hills or certain elevation? Do you ever hunt bottoms? Or is that all situational? What did you kind of think about that?
It's definitely situational, but it's mostly based on doe groups. And I think that you're trying to catch bucks in the mountains when they're traveling from doe group to doe group. Some of these areas, there may be a whole mountain that's, I don't know, 3,000 acres, 4,000 acres. And there may be, 2 or 3 doe groups of, a doe and 2 fawns, or 2 does and something like that on that whole mountain. So knowing where those areas are that hold those does, and then knowing kind of what's the quickest and easiest route between them, is a good way of finding those areas. And that may be that there's a big, a group of does or a couple groups of does down in the bottom in a swamp. And then, there's a couple up on the mountain. And that's actually the spot that I hunted last year was just like that. These bucks are moving between a mountain and a big, area of swamp and bottomland where there's a bunch of does. So, it's kind of like they run the swamp route for a couple of days or down in this big area that's, I don't know, thousands of acres. And then they're going to, I'm going to go up on the mountains now and run the spines up high. And so they'd run, up this particular area to head up the mountain. And that's where they'd come off it and go up it. So, we hunt both. Excuse me just for a sec. Must have COVID. We'll hunt them all. Really, it just depends on it's situational, and it depends, on the doe groups and what you see the previous years. It seems like to me, like those bucks really like to hang up high and run those higher routes, like earlier in the rut and later in October, like kind of almost that same scrape phase. Most of the scrapes that I'm hunting are up high, I would say. And it seems like they start to drop down lower and lower as the season goes on. I would say that's really a generalization, but more or less that seems to be what I see.
Yeah, it is so difficult to, as I'm asking these questions on here, to answer that, because everything is so situational by area, and you could go, 15 miles to another location and they could be using the terrain completely different. But because I don't really have a rule of thumb, whether high or low for that, because it's all depending on, there's some areas that I hunt that have the swamps in the bottoms, and then you have the ridges up higher. And, I've found more luck in that middle November, after the first week in November, in those bottoms, funneling between beaver ponds, stuff like that. Because it seems like a lot of times that's where a lot of the thick vegetation is, and then you'll find those little openings within it, and trying to find, and it depends, every year sometimes those things change depending on, beavers in the area damming things up. Sometimes it floods different areas, and staying on top of that. But I've found a lot of luck in the bottoms at that in that later time. And again, that's not a rule of thumb across the board, but in some of the areas I hunt, that seems to be pretty promising.
No, that makes perfect sense. I think that it seems to me like the density of does is always higher in those bottoms along swamps. So we have a lot of swamps as well, beaver ponds and cattail swamps, swale bogs, stuff like that. And, one of the advantages of hunting those areas during firearm season is you can sit over them and you can see a long ways. And that's one of the only places that you can. You're going to be either on a young cut, a swamp, or maybe a power line to shoot more than, 50 yards with a rifle around here.
Yeah.
And most of the time it's not even that far. So that is one of the strategies we use during the rut of his rifle season, is kind of getting in one of these areas where we can see a long ways, and maybe cover two different strong movement patterns in, either direction. But, and swamps are great for that. And, I around here, a lot of big bucks die in those swamps for sure. So, it seems to, it's interesting, because it seems like they start up high and then, they start to drop down, and then there's a period where they're kind of going like really focusing low and then doing some back and forth stuff. And then it seems like late they almost go back up high. And I don't know if that's like they're going back home or what. And then, but they're not up there for long, and it seems like it's sporadic, and then they're gone. I shouldn't say they're not always gone, but a lot of the times the snow pushes them out of there, and they're just, some of these areas are completely vacant of deer in, from say January. Well, it depends when the snow comes. Really, it could be late December or even mid-December. But some of these areas are vacant of deer, and that's an interesting thing that I find, and it's an unknown variable whether a buck is going to stay up high or not, and it's so weather dependent, and it varies year to year. So you might find, sheds up over 2,000 feet if it's a mild winter and there's not much snow cover. And then, the next year there won't be a deer, hasn't been a deer up there for anywhere close to any time where he could have shed. So that's an interesting thing. That's, I guess, probably one of the only downfalls of hunting up high is like you have that come into play. And, we get some pretty significant snowfalls up here. So, if we get 2 feet dumped on us in late November, pretty good chance like those deer are going to be down low. It's just, more favorable habitat for wintering, I'd say.
Yeah, that's definitely, I'd say you have that's a lot different than here, as far as we don't have like that much of, we have some bad weather, but not enough to push them in different elevations. I will find sheds if we have a hard winter in the bottoms more, but that doesn't happen till later normally than probably what you're experiencing.
Yeah, that's it. And it's kind of funny because like, I'll be doing winter scouting whenever through the whole winter, and I find an area and I'm like, this is unbelievable. And I'm like, I haven't seen a track in 3 hours, a deer track. Right. But I know that, next, through, mid-November, it could be really good the next year. So you got to learn to gauge that. And if you can so actually the buck ended up killing last year. I was able to figure out kind of where he went when he wasn't up high. And that's how I ended up tracking him down in the snow and killing him. But that's how I ended up picking up his track, is I knew that we got a bunch of snow, like 2 feet, and most of the deer moved, out of the high ground and down into the bottoms. And so I kind of anticipated that and set a bunch of cameras for him in an area we had got him in the past, late season and during the summer some, and he had moved back into that area, and I ended up cutting his track and killing him. But if I didn't have that knowledge of knowing where that buck went and kind of predicting or, anticipating him being there, I never would have got that intel and ended up killing him. So the more you can learn about these animals and how they react to their environment, the better off you're going to be. And that just sometimes takes experience in the particular area you're hunting. I mean, I can tell you, all of my experience and what I think, but that doesn't mean that that's going to be everybody's experience. And, I like to talk in generalizations because at least it gives you like a plan and a thought process and something to start with.
Yep.
But after you try to implement that, you're going to have to go into situational, I guess, reactions, or a plan that's situational, specific to your area in your given conditions.
Yeah, and adapt to it.
There's no one size fits all in the mountains or the big woods. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I'm glad, that makes why you make a good guest, as far as you can make, educated generalizations, but, are able to say, you gotta, that's a good starting point, but that's not your end all be all with it,
No, there's no hard and fast rules. There just isn't. It's just
I've been looking.
People tell you there is. They're just I don't know. They're liars, or they don't know what they're talking about. It's just you have to learn it. And the other thing that's just crazy and throws another variable in all this is every buck is an individual and has his own personality. And I see that. I mean, it's just more and more evident the more I study these animals. It's just everyone is different. Everyone does different stuff during different portions of the year. Some deer are extremely daylight active. Some deer aren't at all. Some deer are aggressive. Some deer aren't. Some deer don't move far at all. Some deer are you get them miles apart. Like, what the heck are you doing over here, dude? Like, you don't live here. Like, go home. Like that type of thing. Usually those are the ones that get killed. But yeah, so learning, it's just so many layers to it. It's learning not only the mountains and, how the deer relate and trying to predict what they'll do in general, but then also learning those individual bucks, which is another huge challenge. And I love that part of it. That's really fascinating to me, to try to, pick apart a 10,000 acre mountain range and then find one particular animal and then track him and follow his habits and his tendencies over, a period of years, and then try to put the puzzle pieces together. That's like the ultimate thing for me, and I really, really enjoy. For me anymore, it's I enjoy learning about them and following them and their life and their habits and their personalities just as much as I do as killing them. So it's almost kind of sad. I'm like, man, I don't get to see what he would have done next year, or what he would have been, or what if he did the same thing again. Or I've seen some of these bucks do the same thing for 3 or 4 years, and then all of a sudden they do something totally different. And it's like out of left field. And you're like, what, leaves you scratching your head. And it's like, you think you got it figured out, but you never really do.
No, that's so true. And then you're trying to figure out why they made that change after so long. And
right.
It's a constant mind game. So to kind of transition into the last topic that I want to talk to you about, is there's a ton I would like to talk to you about, but for the sakes of this podcast, I want to talk to you about weather and how that relates to your hunting. And so at this time of year, with the late October kind of coming into November here, how much does weather play a role in your hunting?
Weather always, well, for a couple of reasons, but weather always plays a huge role in my hunting. It just, I guess, studying the weather and hunting by the weather just plays into my style of hunting and the way that I hunt. I have a full-time job. I have 2 kids and a third one on the way. I own a house and a property. I have a lot of stuff to do outside of the woods. So I really don't have as much time as I would like to. So I need to try to pick the most ideal times to be in the woods to spend my time there. And I've found over the years that, hunting the weather, in particularly cold fronts, if nothing else, That's the single biggest factor, I think, is going to give me the best results. So I'm always trying to hit those weather fronts and pick my spots depending upon the weather. And that probably rings true until I'd say mid-November. And then I'm hunting dates and, historical data and what I've seen, over the years. And I kind of put together a kind of mini study on the rut in my particular area. I gathered, I think, intel from 100 different trail cameras for a 5-year period from 4 or 5 different guys that really ran cameras seriously. And I identified a date range where, it's just like, you got to be in the woods. These deer up on their feet, covering crazy amounts of ground during daylight. And that's that, November 15th to 22nd, 23rd timeframe. But outside of that, I'm really, my hunting is weather dependent, especially in October. I won't hunt on a warm day in October. I'll do something else. So I'm really timing those fronts, and, I run a lot of trail cameras and a lot of cell cameras. And I think we talked before the podcast, and I know there's been some data out there and some studies done that say that, weather doesn't affect deer movement. And I'm very data and science oriented person, but I think that those studies are flawed in some way. I don't know how. I didn't do the studies myself, but I am wholly convinced that weather, dictates deer movement and increases deer movement, especially cold fronts. So that's what I pay attention to. I mean, I see, night and day differences between a warm day and warm night, and then a night when a front hits. It's like a light switch flip. So that's enough for me. I guess I don't need to convince anybody else, and I don't really, care what other people think. If they want to believe what they want to believe, that's fine. But for me, I am hunting weather, and I think I'm convinced that it makes a huge impact on deer activity. And, we talked before, in October or any other time even during the rut. But if I'm hunting a buck that's bedded on his bed or on his belly at, 5 PM, and I need him to move a significant distance to get a shot at him in daylight. And if it's a 70-degree day in late October, he's probably not going to do that, and I'm not going to get a shot. So I've just wasted a trip into the woods where I could have been taking care of something else at home or at work. I've impacted my hunting area by going in there again on a day that was probably a low percentage sit. So I try to time those weather fronts so that I'm sitting in, my best spots on a day that I think that has, the best prospect for a deer to move in daylight, and to move not, 75 yards in daylight, to move 300, 400, 500 yards, and give me a chance to get in front of them rather than trying to hunt on top of a bed. Because in the mountains, these deer, I mean, they do have specific beds, but they more have areas that they bed, and they have not just one. They have maybe, I don't know how many. I wish I could radio collar one of these deer in these mountains, but I think that they literally bed in, 20 different spots, areas during a deer season. So trying to pick one of those 20 spots on any given day and then get, it's like you may pick a ridge that he's bedding on, but then how do you know how close to get to him on that ridge? There's a good chance you're going to push too far and bump him, or not push far enough, and he's not going to get to you in daylight. So it's just really tough, I think, in this country to hunt a specific bed, which I know is very effective in other parts of the country, but I just don't think where we're at, it's a super effective way of doing it, at least in the, the type of environment that I'm in the mountains. So I'm really relying on those weather fronts to get those deer up and moving early, and then covering some ground in daylight so that I have an opportunity to encounter one.
Yeah. And so with that being said, when you're looking at these weather fronts, is there a timing with the weather fronts? Are you waiting until, like, say, that cold front is there, or are you hunting the beginning of it, the front end of it? What does that look like?
Probably I'm waiting. Yeah. I mean, I'd say all of it. I'm hunting the front end of it during the front and like the tail end of it. It seems like, and that's something I don't really think I have dialed at all. as to when during that front they're going to move. I find sometimes they move right. Like, for example, we have this, some cooler temperatures coming in right now in rainfall, and my cameras are actually blowing up this evening, but it was 75 degrees out. And I didn't think that they'd be moving until maybe, later tonight or tomorrow, but I was wrong. So that if I had hunted the front end of this front, I would have been in a little bit, would have been a decent sit, I guess. So if I can hunt all of it, that's better. If I had to pick one, I'm picking like the day. So say it's literally, today it's 75 and tomorrow it's going to be a high of 60 or something like that. I'm going to hunt the day with the high of 60 if I can. The other, and I don't hunt, I do hunt mornings early season, but I don't hunt a ton of them, but I really like the mornings, when a front's come in and you get that really high pressure morning. It seems like when I always look at, the barometric pressure actually on Weather Underground, you can see it. They have a graph.
Yep.
And you see the temperature line on the graph and it's plummeting. And then the pressure is rising. It looks like they're going to crash into each other. Those mornings right there where they look like they're going to crash are the mornings I really try to identify and focus on early season to hunt. It seems like those deer are just on their feet and you almost get like flurries of, rut activity, I guess, or rutting behavior. It's not like they're chasing does or breeding does or, running for 10 miles, but they'll be up, at 9:00 in the morning, checking scrapes or sparring or doing whatever, nosing around. So I like to focus on those mornings. But other than that, it's mostly evenings and, I'm trying to hunt front end during and after that front.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I'm in agreement. I love science. I love like looking at data, and that I just, from experience and just everyone else I talk to, it's just like cold fronts are definitely the ticket. I need to be in the woods. If there's a cold front in late October, I need to be in the woods.
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet. If you can hunt every day of the season, like go for it. Like that's great. I can't do that though. So I have to try to time it. There's something to be said for just being in the woods. The more time you're in the woods, the better chance you have. And if you have a zillion spots to burn, then go for it. But, a lot of times I'm hunting one or two particular bucks. And so being in that buck's area every day is not going to work. He's going to leave because if he knows you're there every day, he's like, well, I have 7,000 more acres where there's nobody ever. So I'm going over there and I'm going to abandon that area that you're in every day, even if it's an ideal type of area. So managing that is a big part of it too. People say, well, if you bump a buck or pressure a buck, he's not going to leave. And it's like, well, no, he's not going to leave, but not leaving in where I hunt means he's not going to move 7 miles away. It means he's still staying in that maybe, 4 to 5 square mile range, but he's just going to avoid, the 100 acres that you're in all the time. So he didn't leave at all. He's just avoiding a little slice of his home range. And that's, and looking at that big picture is something I think people fail to do a lot. And I've even myself, and the more experience I gain, the more I try to look at this stuff big picture and look at how these deer are, I might be hunting and focusing on one focal point of his home range, right? But that doesn't mean that there's not 10 other ones out there that I'm unaware of and haven't found yet. So that kind of puts things into perspective. I think these bucks literally will be on like 3 or 4 different mountains in the course of, a week or two. And, I've seen it time and time again, especially during the rut, they'll travel miles and miles and miles. I know some bucks that get shot 3, 4, 5, 6 miles away from, where I have pictures of it. And I'm like scratching my head and I'm always like, oh, he must've shot him in my spot. And then I like kind of hear where the deer got killed. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Well, I don't know what to say about that then. I mean, it's just is what it is. So looking big picture and really realizing that these deer in the mountains, move so far. It's not to say that they don't have areas they prefer and like to hang out. That they definitely do. And if you can find those, you're definitely in the game, but he might not have one of those. And I can, I've kind of determined that because I run a lot of cameras, and when I find an area that I think is one of those focal points, I'll saturate it with cameras. I really will. And so, you don't always get a picture of a buck when he's in the area, but when he's in the area and I get pictures of him at 5 cameras in a night, I can be relatively confident that if he's in that area, I'm going to catch a picture of him at some point when he's there. And when it's like I have him on 5 cameras one night and then 3 cameras the next morning, and then like that next night I have him on 2 cameras, and then I don't have him for a week, to me that means he's just not in that area. He's gone and moved to a different area. And then when he's back, you know it. So it's kind of like it's almost like they're like a train and they're going into different train stations. And when they're in this train station, they're parked and they're doing whatever. And then in that particular area, and then they leave the station and they take a track and they go to the next place. The only thing is most of the time you only know of 1 or 2 of their stations that they're going to, and you don't know of like all the stops that they have. There may be a guy that's hunting, 3 miles away across a lake or across a mountain range. It's, he's getting his picture at another one of those stations. So just keeping that into perspective and trying to realize that, I think, is very helpful. But if it's a station that's in a shady part of town, there's a lot of crime and it's really risky, he just might avoid going to that spot and kind of cut it out of his routine. So you got to keep that in mind.
Yeah. I remember a buck I was hunting, and I specifically, because it was in 2015, and he had hit, I figured this out later, but I missed him on the last day of the season, which I believe is November 15th. And I checked my cameras, and he hit 4 of my cameras within, I think it was 18 hours. And the furthest one spanned 2.5 miles away. And in that amount of time, it covered that ground. And I'm like, he's not the only buck has done that. You know what I mean? It's not,
no
that's
way.
Especially, at that time of year. So it's just incredible.
On some of these bucks, I do kind of figure out, I'm just using that analogy of like a train station, but I will find 2 of their stations, if you will. And it's literally crazy. I'll get pictures of them here, and then like 6 hours later, they're 2-3 miles away at the other one. And it's like, man, and that's the thing you have to keep in mind, is that deer that you're hunting may be miles from you, but it does not take him long to get to you. You're never out of the game, and it could happen at any moment. That's what you have to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah, that's a very good perspective for that, especially when you're sitting there questioning your sanity.
Yeah, well, you just have to realize that you just have to look. It's like the scale of things in the mountains is much bigger. You may be in a farm in Iowa or Ohio that's 100 acres of timber, and you didn't see or get a picture of the deer for 2 days just because maybe he's on the neighbor that's like a quarter mile away. That deer is probably always within a half mile to a mile of you at the most. But it's just that scale. You just have to it's almost like a 10 exit in the mountains. That's kind of like how it goes. So you just have to look at it that way. And if you have identified one of these areas that he's using to either travel or bed or whatever, you're in the game. Stick with it and, just keep learning about that animal, keep learning about what he does. And, a lot of the bucks, they're individuals, but they'll do a lot of the same stuff year to year. And it seems like those areas that, have a good deer, if that deer gets killed, there'll be another buck that will come in and take his spot and start to, go through that same area. He probably won't do exactly what the previous buck did, but he's going to do a lot of the similar stuff. So that's a good thing about if you identify these areas in the mountains, these kind of focal points, as I call them. They're usually good for a long time. I mean, there may be off years where for whatever reason, something changed, the mass crop's not there, or what, the weather's bad, there we get a lot of snow, or whatever the reason may be, where, that it just doesn't happen in there like it has in the past. But a lot of them will stay good for, year after year after year and continue to produce, good deer and mature deer that are using that for the same reason that their predecessors did, because, it has all those factors that they're looking for.
Yeah. And, years of trail camera data and just time in the woods is definitely on your side to be able to figure those type areas out. And I truly love that factor with it. And definitely think, to be consistently successful in the mountains, paying attention to all those details and studying that data that you've gained from the work you put in with trail cameras and just time in the woods can be so valuable.
Yeah, it is. It's extremely valuable. This year, I was hunting a couple of areas that really had a good run the last 5 years or so of some big deer, and some old deer. And last year, we had in a 2-year period, I think we lost 5 of them. We killed a couple. Another one was killed by another hunter, one of those, like I said, 3-4 mile away type deals. Mm-hmm. Actually more than that. I think there's $6. And then 2 of them disappeared and they were really old. And I think they may have died over the winter. But now it's that area is kind of, there's a couple good bucks in there. Don't get me wrong. It's some mature ones, but it's just not what it was. So I've kind of shifted my focus out of there, and I don't really have a ton of data on some of these new areas that I'm hunting this year. And it's kind of I feel I don't know, inadequate. I'm like, oh man, I don't feel like I have that great of a chance. Cause I'm just going on basically, my experience in other places and trying to apply it here. But I don't know for sure. And I don't feel ultra confident that I'm going to be even kill a deer in any of these places this year, just because I don't know, I can apply what I've learned, but that doesn't mean that that's going to, plug into this scenario and just, equal success. So, if you can spend more, like you said, the more time you can spend, the more you learn, the more, consecutive years of data and experience you can stack in your favor, the more successful you're going to be for sure.
Yeah, I like I said, I couldn't agree more with that. And as much as I love hunting new areas and I always am scouting new areas and doing stuff, I definitely feel more confident in the areas that I have previous data from and tend to be more successful in those areas.
Yep, without a doubt. And that's kind of what helps you sit there longer and day after day. If you have that data and you believe in it, that's kind of what I mean by having the logic to back it up and give you that confidence to sit there. Because I can tell you this year, if I'm sitting in one of these new spots based on a hunch, like I said, and I know deer in the past and the similar type of landscape have done this. So, I'm trying to predict their movement that way. It's not as concrete and as solid as, actual having data from, this buck did this last year. So,
yep.
Yep. And actually it's funny that we're talking about deer movement. I just here in my cell camera, and I was telling you how, that weather dictates movement. And I just got 2 of the shooters I've been after within a few minutes of each other on these cell cameras. And I haven't had either of them in a week. So there's really some correlation there, I'm telling you, between that weather and, and that activity.
Real-time proof right there.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I'm always checking these damn things. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So in New Hampshire, we actually have to be careful because there's a law that says we can't use trail camera data from the same calendar day to harvest a deer, more or less. I'm paraphrasing. So I have to log out of all my apps the days that I'm going to hunt and can't look at any of the pictures or use any of that stuff. So that's kind of a bummer because, I understand the law to an extent, but if I think anybody thinks I'm getting a picture of a deer 1.5 miles up a mountain and then going to run up there and kill him, that's not going to happen.
No,
so, but it's more probably, geared toward the hunters that are hunting, they got a camera in their backyard on an apple tree or something like that. And the deer walks out and they run out back and shoot it. But anyway, I do have to be careful. And anybody that's hunting in New Hampshire, just, if it's listening to this, be aware of that law if you're going to use these. But I definitely utilize them big time, but you just have to, make sure you're doing it the right way. So anyway, yeah, they're great. And it kind of helps to illustrate the correlation between weather and deer movement, at least for me.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Brett, I think that's a ton of information that we covered here in this episode, and definitely gonna want to have you back on to dive into more of the specific details at another date. But I guess all I could say now is I good luck to you, this season. And, you and I now, we talk back and forth from time to time. So I'm excited to see what your hunting season kind of turns into.
Absolutely. And good luck to you. I actually think I may be headed to PA Public at some point this month. I'm not sure when, but, and it may be when this comes out, but maybe we'll talk a little bit offline about that one, but that should be interesting
definitely.
To do. But
cool.
So good luck. It's a super, super exciting time of year right now. It's like everything's about to be, going down, and it's like, the cameras and the scrapes are blowing up, and, that time of year we all wait for is just around the corner. So, there's so much excitement, so much anticipation, and I love it. That's, part of the fun for me is all that excitement and anticipation and, wondering what's this year going to bring, what's going to happen tomorrow when I sit there, next week, or is this buck going to show up, or, all that stuff. So, it's an awesome time of year.
Yeah, that's definitely for sure. So, Brett, where can people find some more information? You mentioned your YouTube channel, which is Just Hunt Club, correct?
Yep. Just Hunt Club's YouTube channel. If you want to see, Northeast based content, not to say we don't hunt out of the Northeast. We definitely do. As, I already said, I love to travel to hunt, but it's Northeast based. We have storylines in, a lot of the Northeast states, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York, and PA. So if you're a Northeast hunter, I think you'll really enjoy some of the content we'll be bringing you. When we bring it to semi-live this year, whereas, the Seabuck series we did after the fact. So you can check in and follow along. We already have stuff up now, and there'll be plenty more down the pipe. You can, if you're interested in what I'm doing, but specifically, you can check me on Instagram, and that's BrettJoy22 is my handle. Pretty simple, BRETTJOY 22. So I try to keep that updated, and I don't know, I document kind of the day-to-day stuff. And a lot of the stuff in the video, semi-live video format gets, left out because you can only show so much without running hour-long episodes every 3 or 4 days. So we try to, show the highlights or the best parts of it, but the day-to-day is kind of in there, and you can see what I'm doing and how I approach it. And I enjoy, it's funny because, I really enjoy what you're doing, Beau, because there's just not a lot of information out there about hunting in the Northeast part of the country and then hunting the big woods or the mountains at all. Like there's not much out there at all. So, I love to talk to guys that are doing the same thing and seeing, even if they're not in the exact same area, how we can, draw similarities between our different situations and learn from each other. So I always like to check out what everybody else is doing that's doing similar stuff, and like to share what I'm doing as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally enjoy that myself. And like you guys were talking here, there's so many similarities that you can draw, back and forth between the places you're hunting and the places I'm hunting, and the listeners. Like there's so many similarities that can be learned and, adapted to your specific spot. So Brett, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.